And here we go. Episode 130 of ThePatteFacts streaming on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts from. It is September 2nd, 2025. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm William Pattison. All right, we are back for my first real week of college football takeaways. Obviously, we had week 0 last week, and I did my takeaways from that. And we had, 4 or 5 games to decipher. But now we've got a full week of college football in the book. So many big games. This was the best week 1 we've ever seen. And that means we have plenty to cover. So happy you're here. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get into it. Make sure to follow at ThePatteFacts on Instagram, Twitter /X, and on YouTube. And you might be watching on YouTube right now. And if you are, I appreciate it. You're getting the first look at our new merchandise. Oh, let me show this for the camera real quick. College football t-shirts. I'll have a little commercial, a little bit of a teaser coming out soon. But you get the first pick, first look. We've got another couple of mock-ups over there as well. So really excited for that. But make sure you're following on all those channels. We're putting out a ton of content with college football season in full swing. And if you're listening to this on a podcast, you might not be watching this. So if you are listening to a podcast, whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever it may be, make sure you're following. Give us a nice rating. 5 stars would be nice. Share with a friend, whatever it may be. I know you got some college football fans that would love to hear some of this, maybe, and maybe they're Alabama fans and don't want to face the truth. That might be possible as well. But make sure to turn that bell notification on so you never miss a take. All right, plenty to cover today. We're going to cover a lot of the big games from the weekend: LSU, Clemson, Texas, Ohio State, Alabama, Florida State. I'll also have some Notre Dame, Miami as well. And then we'll talk Tennessee, Syracuse. We'll talk Auburn, Baylor. We'll talk UCLA and Utah. I was really impressed with Devin Dampier for the Utes. And this is going to be a jam-packed episode. So stick around for it all. I think it's all great. Let's dive right into it. I want to begin with this, and it's my week 1 takeaways. And we'll begin with number 9 LSU defeating Clemson 17-10. And I'm doing this old school now. I'm pulling out notes. I've got pages on pages of notes I printed out. Shout out to my friend Parker Davis, a listener of ThePatteFacts, for helping me print this stuff out. The library's closed on Labor Day. What in the world? People have got stuff to do. I've got podcasts to produce. But this game was on my radar for a long time heading into the season. Obviously, if you have been listening, you know how I feel about the Clemson Tigers. And LSU under Brian Kelly has not had much success at all in openers, winless in openers, 0-5 heading into the matchup on Saturday. And the theme of all of those games were, okay, we have an early lead or we're hanging around, but we cannot finish games. And you might remember last year, Brian Kelly had a very infamous post-game press conference where he was banging on the table, kind of making a fool of himself. But that frustration was pent up. And it was the same narrative over and over again. With that repeat itself on the road in probably the toughest environment that LSU has faced in an opener under Brian Kelly. There was also the side of, both teams returned a ton of production. Clemson returns a ton of players from last year's team, a big reason why I believe they're the best team in the country and will win the national championship. LSU brings a bunch of guys back like a Harold Perkins and a Whit Weeks on the defensive side of the ball, Garrett Nussmeier on the offensive side of the ball, Aaron Anderson. And then obviously for Clemson, you've got Cade Klubnik and Antonio Williams, and on the defensive side of the ball, TJ Parker and Ashton Hampton, Avion Terrell. So many guys for both these teams. Peter Woods as well for Clemson. That's going to be an NFL guy. And this was also going to be a top-tier quarterback matchup. That's all what we thought heading into this game. But my biggest takeaway, I really could not have expected. My biggest takeaway from LSU Clemson is that LSU has a defense. Defensive coordinator Blake Baker did an incredible job. There was a ton of pressure throughout the game on Cade Klubnik. Made life really, really difficult. LSU held Clemson, a top-tier offense heading into 2025, to 262 total yards and 32 rushing yards. Clemson was 3 of 13 on third down. They were 2 of 4 on fourth down. The front was aggressive. They put pressure on Cade Klubnik. They made it difficult for him to get shots and plays down the field. They totally took out the run game to where that was not a factor, and they made Clemson one-dimensional. And Clemson's a really, really talented team. And LSU's defense has struggled in years past. Like, ever since Brian Kelly has arrived, it's been the interior guys are good. They'll make plays. The linebackers are solid. They'll make plays. But the secondary has constantly been the issue. That was not the case in this one. The secondary looked like LSU of old. And Mansour Delane, the transfer for Virginia Tech, who Brian Kelly said was one of their top portal acquisitions, was phenomenal. 2 tackles, 2 pass deflections, an interception that was really, really key in the momentum of the game. This was a really, really strong showing from a defense that has continued to let down year after year. And then, outside of the secondary, Harold Perkins, a guy that was injured last year, surprisingly decides to come back this season. He has 5 tackles, a sack, and 1.5 tackles for loss. West and Weeks, the linebacker trio, they finished with 7 tackles. I thought LSU's tackling was very disciplined. They did not allow, many yards after contact. And again, that front and the linebackers did a really good job of eliminating the run game. It made Clemson really one-dimensional. And when Antonio Williams got hurt on what was like the 3rd play from scrimmage for Clemson's offense, things really got dicey because now Delane is matched up with Bryant Wesco or a TJ Moore. And I'm not saying those guys are bad. Like, I like Wesco. I like Moore. But the strength of this offense is Cade Klubnik and Antonio Williams, one of the best quarterback wide receiver duos in the country. Antonio Williams is a top 5 wide receiver in college football. So you really needed a guy like that. And when he goes down, LSU did a really good job of taking advantage of those matchups. So hats off to Blake Baker, man. This was a really, really strong performance from them and one of the best defensive performances we've seen from LSU in a big game in a while. We're not too far removed from LSU getting shellacked by Alabama last year in their own building. What was it, 42-3? Alabama ran all over them. And this defense was much, much improved, took advantage of the opportunity of no Antonio Williams. Cade Klubnik was forced into a lot of hurried throws, faced a lot of pressure throughout the night, and did not look like the version of him that we saw in the college football playoff up against a really strong Texas defense. Cade Klubnik's one of his best games last year was against Texas in the college football playoff. He was dialed in. He was very composed, was able to deliver the ball accurately and efficiently and put it in a couple of tight windows. He did not have that time against this LSU defense because of Baker's scheme of putting the blitz and putting the pressure on him and forcing quick decisions. And when you're winning the one-on-one coverage matchups in the secondary with guys like Mansour Delane, it's really tough to win that game and give credit where credit's due. LSU was able to do exactly that. Now, that second big key point heading into this game was that LSU has had plenty of opportunities in these opening games, but they've never been able to finish. LSU was able to finish this time. They trailed early, but they made plays over the course of the game to stay within distance when they were trailing. They tie it up, and then they put the foot on the pedal. They never let go. Now, there were a couple of offensive possessions I thought could have been better, but the defense always held their end of the bargain. And that was the main difference here. Like, the defense was better, but they finished the game. They found a way to win. And that was something that Brian Kelly continued to harp on after, losses to USC last year in the opener and losses to Florida State in the opener. This time, LSU was able to finish the job. Garrett Nussmeier, 28 of 38, 230 yards, 1 touchdown. The rushing attack was really, really solid for the Tigers, where they go 29 carries for 110 yards. Caden Durham, 74 yards and a touchdown. The wide receivers, I thought, were really, really big, and none were bigger than Aaron Anderson, who goes 6 receptions for 99 yards. And there was a stretch where he had like 3 receptions in a row, put LSU in scoring position. For the game, the LSU wide receivers total 246 yards. A really big X factor for this LSU team going forward, and I talked about him on my preseason top 25 podcast, Trey'Dez Green. Trey'Dez Green is a really, really good player at 6'7" tight end, kind of that X factor, a guy that you can just throw the ball up to. Now, he only had 2 receptions in this game, but he did have a touchdown, and that was on Avion Terrell, one of the better defensive players for this Clemson team. And Green made Terrell look insignificant. I mean, look tiny out there. Trey'Dez Green will be a guy to watch for this LSU team. I look for them to get him more involved in this offense because I think he's really, really tough to defend. And I was really impressed with Garrett Nussmeier throughout the course of this one, to where he took a couple of big hits from a TJ Parker and was kind of hobbled, was limping, but he never got thrown off his game. He continued to make accurate throws, continue to make the right decisions. And, for a guy that, the jury's still out on what type of quarterback he'll be this season. I know he faced a lot of praise this offseason, was given a lot of praise, I should say. I thought he lived up to the hype and played really, really well. One of the things last year that he struggled with in these big games was turnovers. Go back to that Texas A&M game where LSU's up early, and what gave the game away was Garrett Nussmeier turning the ball over. And he did not do that on Saturday, kept LSU within arm's distance, kept the foot on the pedal when they had the lead, and led a really good game-winning drive down the field and found Trey'Dez Green in the end zone. So my takeaways for LSU, they've got a defense and they finished the game, which is 2 things that they struggled to do last year. So I'm already seeing an improvement year over year, which is a really good sign. Now for Clemson, a lot of people text me Saturday night, oh my gosh, William, how does your number 1 team go down in week 1? They're at home. They're playing LSU. I get it. Antonio Williams missing the whole game, I thought, was really significant because that's one of the best players in the country. You need him out there up against what was then, in front of us, a much better LSU defense. And though I think Bryant Wesco is really good, though I think TJ Moore is really good, Antonio Williams is kind of that separating factor to where he can win one-on-one matchups with some of the best in the country. And you did not have that with him out there, to even where Klubnik was forced into a lot of pressure and tough throws. It's like one of those things, if you've got a wide receiver like Williams, you can just kind of put it in the area and it's a 50-50 ball. Like, they didn't have that. And I thought that was really big on a couple of those key downs that led to a 2 of 4 on 4th down and a 3 of 14 on 3rd down. Check that. 3 of 13 on 3rd down. But I thought one of the other really big things was they failed to establish the run. The run game was, non-existent. And I thought that was really, really important. 19 carries, 32 yards. Adam Randall, a guy I talked a lot about this summer. I thought Randall would be really good. He's a converted wide receiver, was a top 10 wide receiver in the 2022 class, ends up moving to running back, played a little bit at the end of last season, had big expectations this year at 6'2", and, kind of a guy that you just can't really prepare for at running back. But outside of the touchdown he had, never really had any other big plays outside of dropping out of the backfield and going into as a receiver on a crucial 3rd down. Randall was a big no-show for me, and really the running back room was a big no-show, and that put a lot of pressure on Clemson and Cade Klubnik to have success in the air. Match that with not having Antonio Williams, it just set up for a really, really tall task. And I thought Bryant Wesco, TJ Moore, and Tyler Brown stepped up in Williams' absence. They totaled 12 receptions, 154 yards combined, which is really, really solid from complimentary production. But again, no running back room or no running game established, no Antonio Williams. I just thought the the issues piled up for Clemson, and on top of how good of a job LSU's defense did, it made life really difficult. But let me get this straight. I'm not out on this Clemson team. You look at the remaining schedule, they host SMU in week 8. I don't think SMU is as strong as they were last year. I project this team to lose about 8 or 9 games, or excuse me, only win 8 or 9 games. Sorry about that. I see a 9-3 season. I think their schedule is tougher. Kevin Jennings was not that good against competent opponents last year. Clemson and Penn State had 5 combined turnovers. So I'm not really worried about that game. At Louisville, week 12 could get dicey, could get interesting. Louisville's played Clemson pretty close over the last couple of years. And then at South Carolina, week 14 will also be a tough one. But I think Clemson will ride a lot of momentum into that game, most likely be a one-loss team. They'll probably be favored in that one, depending on how South Carolina wraps up in SEC play. But they're going to be fine. This is going to be a college football playoff team. I think Miami's good, and we'll talk more about them here in a minute. But I think Clemson's still the best team in the ACC, and they'll have a chance to make the college football playoff despite their loss. I'm not worried about Clemson, folks. And yes, I know they were my number one team and they lost, but pump the brakes. It's a long season. You can have a loss and still win. We saw that with Ohio State last year. For LSU, I think this team understands how big of a year this is. They understand that this is the most talented roster they've had under Brian Kelly. They understand that they had a lot of returning players. They understand this is the year. If they want to win the national championship, if they want to make the college football playoff, this is the year to do it. And I think you saw that level of attention to detail defensively. I think you saw that level of engagement offensively on Saturday. And when you look at their games to go, they've got to keep that up because you go Florida week 3 at home. That's going to be a tough one, really a kind of litmus test for the Gators more so than LSU, already kind of proven themselves. But that could be a really interesting game. That could be a signature win for the Gators. And LSU could maybe get caught sleepwalking a little bit. At Ole Miss week 5, I think the Tigers are the more talented team, even though that's a rivalry matchup. I like LSU. South Carolina at home, week 7 off a bye, I think sets up well for LSU, especially after what we saw in flashes from Lenora Sellers this past weekend. Texas A&M travels to the Bayou as well in week 9. That's a winnable game. At Alabama, week 11 off a bye doesn't seem as ridiculous as it may have seemed a couple of weeks ago. Like, I thought Alabama at home would be pretty comfortable, but after what we saw them look like against Florida State, who knows? LSU might be able to go into there and get a big win. At Oklahoma, week 14, I still think is one of their trickiest games on the schedule because that's a late season game. We saw Oklahoma do that to Alabama last year, and this is a better Oklahoma team. Depending on what the Sooners end up doing, that could be either a last-ditch effort to make the college football playoff or a Oklahoma team that's 9-3, 8-4. That's a good team that's just been kind of battered and bruised with their schedule. I think at Oklahoma is a sneaky one for the Tigers, but I think both Clemson and LSU are college football playoff level teams, and they proved that this weekend. Really impressed with both of them, even though LSU was the bigger takeaway this weekend. The defense, man, the defense was one of my biggest takeaways this weekend. One of the most impressive units from year to year, LSU defensively. And there's another one on defense we'll talk about here in a little bit. Okay, we'll move over to Texas and Ohio State. This was supposed to be the big one of the weekend, and instead it was the Buckeyes spoiling the Manning debut. And heading into this one, we knew this was, the long-awaited first game for Arch Manning as the full-time starter for the Longhorns. He's got a loaded roster around him offensively. You've got, C.J. Baxter and Quintravian Wiesner in your backfield. You've got Ryan Wingo and Emmett Mosley, the fifth, at wide receiver. The offensive line was a little bit of a concern heading in, knowing you had to replace 4 starters from last year, but DJ Campbell was one of the guys that was a starter last year. He returns. And defensively, I went on and on about this defense. I mean, Anthony Hill Jr., Colin Simmons, Michael Toff, Johnny McDonald. This is a really good defense. And I thought they showed that on Saturday. But in terms of the offense, this was supposed to be Arch pretty comfortable with a pretty solid group around him. For Ohio State, this is a new look team coming off their national championship win. Jeremiah Smith, one of the best players in the country, probably the best player in the country. And you get an inexperienced but highly touted quarterback battle between Manning and Sayin. And instead, we kind of got mid versus mid at quarterback because I wasn't really impressed with either of them. But Ohio State's defense was really impressive in key moments. Texas goes 5 of 14 on third down, 1 for 5 on fourth down. The goal line tush push was one of the worst executed tush pushes I've ever seen by any team offensively, but Ohio State was there in that moment and made a big stop. Ohio State was there to make a big-time interception from Jermaine Matthews, a guy that I think is going to take a big step in this season. Ohio State made the big plays defensively over the course of the game. 1 of 5 on fourth down. Texas would get into field goal position or in the red zone, having an opportunity to put up points, but Ohio State would step up in the big moments. They replaced a ton of players from last year. Jack Sawyer, JT Tomaluau. You could go down the list. Cody Simon at linebacker. A ton of big-time players gone, but guys like Sonny Styles stepped up. And Jermaine Matthews, again, I mentioned him. Arvell Reese, Caleb Downs. Like, we know this is a group that has talent, but I thought they overperformed my expectation. And that was one of the big takeaways here. Like, Texas, I think, still has the better unit, but Ohio State was really, really strong defensively despite all they lost. And then I do want to give credit to Texas as well, because I thought Texas's defense was really good. They hold Ohio State to 3 of 12 on third down and 215 total yards. I thought they did their job. They gave Arch Manning and company a ton of opportunities throughout this game to put points on the board and get the ball back. Obviously, the offense wasn't able to do that, but it wasn't Texas's defense that was the issue. And not that we anticipated that, because this is going to be one of the best defenses in the country. I think I was more so surprised that both of these teams have elite level defenses. I was more so thinking it would just be Texas. Ohio State loses a lot. We knew their secondary was going to be good with David Igbunison and Caleb Downs and Matthews. But I was worried about the kind of the front level guys and the linebackers. Both of these teams have elite level defenses and put the opposing talented quarterbacks in really, really tough positions. Let's talk about that quarterback battle, because that was one of the big storylines heading into this one. And one of the things I talked about leading up to the game last week was, look, I think we've got this narrative a little bit wrong. Everyone's focused on Arch Manning in his first game, but we're not really talking about Julian Sayin. Like, Arch Manning completed 68% of his passes last year, appeared in 10 plus games. This is a guy that had plenty of experience, even though he hadn't started, but against Mississippi State and University of Louisiana Monroe, this is still a guy that has started an SEC game and played a lot of snaps. Julian Sayin went into this game with 27 total snaps in his career. So the experience level was a lot different. And I thought there was more pressure on Sayin to be better. And I'm not necessarily saying Sayin was better, but Manning was not what I anticipated he would be. Arch goes 17 of 30, 170 yards passing, 1 touchdown and 1 interception. And my big takeaway from Arch this past weekend was he never got comfortable. I did not like Steve Sarkisian's scheme that put him in a lot of tough positions. There were a lot of third and longs. I thought there was too much lenience on the run game. And I get it. It's a really talented Ohio State defense, but you got to let your quarterback get in rhythm early. And I did not think that Texas gave him the opportunity to do that. There were a couple of really strong throws from Arch, and that's the type of potential that you see that could make him a top-tier quarterback in college football. But there are a lot of mechanical things that he's got to fix. The sidearm throws, we're not at the ballpark. We don't need to throw it like a baseball. Hit your receiver on time and accurately on a crucial third down. That Ryan Wingo miss was on Arch Manning. That was something that decided the game, as that put Texas in a fourth down situation. I just thought he never got comfortable. He made a couple of really bad reads and put put the ball in a couple of really bad spots throughout the course of the game. I hate to be critical of the guy because he's young, but for a guy that's received a lot of hype, and it's not necessarily on him, he's got to be better. And he's got to be better with mechanics, and he's got to be better with getting the ball accurately and on time, which is something he was not able to do on Saturday. Too many sidearm throws, missed too many early reads, missed too many easy throws, just the routine stuff that he's got to clean up. And I get it. It's a tough defense, but that was really disappointing to see from Arch. For Sayin, he wasn't bad, but he wasn't a needle mover for me per se. 13 of 20, 126 yards and a touchdown. Did the job, did enough to get the win, but he wasn't wowing me. And I wasn't necessarily thinking I was going to get wowed, but I think Ohio State does have some concerns when they go up against like a Penn State that I think has a much more established offense with Drew Aller and a much better receiving core this season, a running back tandem that's really, really solid. Like games like that, I think Penn State has the upper hand. And, going into week 2, I would still rank Penn State above Ohio State, just basing off of my preseason notions and what I believe of the two teams. But Sayin's got to get in better rhythm with Jeremiah Smith, who was uncharacteristically kind of out of it on Saturday. 6 receptions for 43 yards, but had a number of drops. And some of those were on Sayin as well, but some of those were routine throws that Smith was not able to connect on. And again, a really good Texas defense that was going to be a part of this the whole way. But I was really surprised to see them be so out of sync. I think Sayin's got to be better for this Ohio State team to be back to the college football, top tier list per se, a national championship contender. And what the same goes for Arch Manning, folks. So I'm not just picking sides here, but a little bit of an underwhelming performance from both those quarterbacks who received a lot of recognition heading into the season, more so Arch than Sayin. But again, it's early. You're going up against really good defenses. You can't expect everything's going to be perfect. But again, both these teams will be fine. Ohio State, they got Illinois on the road in week 7, Penn State in week 10. That one's at home. And then you've got at Michigan in week 14. I mean, that Michigan game could be interesting, especially with the way that they have fared against them in years past. I think Penn State is going to be a really tough one, but it helps that they're playing in the shoe. Don't overlook Illinois either. Illinois looks strong this weekend against Western Illinois. And I know you might hear that sentence and say, William, there's no way you just said that. But Illinois is a good team. They're veteran-led, and they've got a good defense. I'm interested to see Sayin's progression over the next couple of weeks leading up to the meat of their Big Ten season. And for Texas, you got an opportunity to get a big-time win on the road at Florida in week 6. That's going to be a tough one. Florida's going to look at that as a resume building win. Oklahoma week 7, neutral site. That's one where you've got to get a win there. At Georgia week 12 off a bye. It helps that you're off a bye, but you are going to be in a really tough spot there. And then Texas A&M week 14. So overall, at Florida, at Georgia are the two games that I think will depend or depict whether Texas is a college football playoff team or not. They've got to pick up a win. One of those has to be a win to make the field. I think they'll beat Oklahoma. I think they'll beat Texas A&M, but at Florida, at Georgia, that's a resume building win they have to have. Okay, we'll go to another SEC battle with another conference. And this one I've got a fired up opinion on. All right. Alabama and Florida State. The Noles put fire on DeBoer is what I have titled this one as. As number 8, Alabama falls at Florida State in embarrassing fashion. The pregame storylines for this one is Alabama returns one of the best rosters in the country and could definitely take a year 2 jump with Kalen DeBoer. I didn't love their quarterback situation, but a lot of people told me this was going to be just like Mac Jones on that 2020 team, right? Oh, Ty Simpson with a really talented roster. Oh, it's going to be all fine, fun, and rainbows. No. I didn't believe that, and I was very outspoken about that. A lot of Alabama people told me, oh, William, Ty Simpson, guy's been there 4 years, and he's barely seen the field. I'm not putting stock in that. I put stock in Keelan Russell, who's the Lamborghini at the shed house, He needs to be playing, but that's another conversation we'll have here in a minute. For Florida State, they're looking to turn things around after a disastrous 2-10 season. A brand new cast. Thomas Castellanos comes over from Boston College after he basically quit midway through the season. Kind of a box of misfit toys for this Florida State team. It's going to be interesting to see what they would look like in the opener. And boy, did we get an answer. This is the lowest moment of the Kalen DeBoer era at Alabama. This is lower than losing to Vanderbilt. This is lower than losing at Oklahoma in the final couple of weeks of the season. This is lower than losing to the second and third strings against Michigan in the bowl game. This is the lowest point that we have seen Kalen DeBoer in Alabama. Alabama was manhandled and out-disciplined once again on Saturday against Florida State. The same characteristics they struggled with last season were on display in the opener of the 2025 season. You're trying to get better from year one to year two. You're trying to get better from last season to this season. And the same characteristics that continue to put Alabama in tough situations last year, which resulted in losses, was exactly what happened on Saturday. Kalen DeBoer has hit rock bottom with this Alabama team. Out-physicaled, out-disciplined, a disaster. Florida State had 388 total yards, 5.1 yards per rush, and 10.9 yards per pass. So every 2 times they ran the ball, they got a first down. Every time they threw the ball, they got a first down. That's what the numbers say. That's horrible in a season opener for this talented of a team. There's no excuse. And there's no excuse to continue to have boneheaded mistakes. 8 penalties for 70 yards. Stupid stuff after the play, falling on a guy that's already been tackled. Pass interference, just routine stuff. Stuff that if you have better coaching, you don't have these issues. I don't think the guys respect Kalen DeBoer. It looks like a free-for-all out there. There's no discipline. And when was the last time Alabama got out-physicaled in a season opener? Nick Saban would have these guys running for miles. They'd be puking their guts out after practice with the type of performance they put up on Saturday. And let's get real about Kalen DeBoer. He's now 9-5 as Alabama's head coach. And this is the Tide's first season opening loss since 2001. And he's now 6-4 against unranked opponents. Nick Saban was 124-4. Wow. 6-4 against unranked opponents through 14 games of his Alabama career. That's an issue. DeBoer now has 4 losses as a 2-touchdown favorite. Saban had 3 of those in his tenure. And look, I'm not trying to compare Kalen DeBoer to the best coach of all time. I'm not trying to do that. But there is a standard that Nick Saban set at Alabama, and Kalen DeBoer is letting that down. That's the reality of this, folks. These guys are not disciplined. They're not prepared to play an opponent that doesn't have a number in front of them. They think they're going to walk into every building and just win because they're Alabama. That's the type of motto that Nick Saban never allowed. He called it rat poison. And sometimes rat poison would seep its way into a situation, but never 4 times out of 10 games against unranked opponents. This is Alabama. Alabama doesn't lose to Florida State in the opener, a Florida State team that replaces everyone from last year on a 2-10 team. Alabama doesn't lose to Vanderbilt on the road. Alabama doesn't get embarrassed in the bowl game against a second and third string unit, Michigan, when Alabama decided to play all their starters. The same characteristics last season that hurt this Alabama team over and over again were on full display Saturday. That's my biggest problem. Ryan Grubb's a good offensive coordinator. Kalen DeBoer is a good offensive mind. All that goes out the window if you get manhandled and you're an undisciplined football team. That's the reality of it. The second thing I want to talk about is Ty Simpson. The funniest thing of this offseason is everyone told me, William, Ty Simpson is going to be just like Mac Jones. Mac Jones was on a really, really good Alabama team, and so was Ty Simpson. The difference is that Nick Saban was on the sideline of one of those teams. Kalen DeBoer is on the sideline for this one and continues to put out an undisciplined and underprepared product. And Ty Simpson also has been on this roster for 4 years and hasn't done a damn thing. Had an opportunity to play 2 years ago against South Florida. Didn't last but more than 2 drives. He's a disaster. And he was on Saturday. 23 of 43, 254 yards, 2 touchdowns. You might look at the 254 and 2 touchdowns and say, oh my gosh, well, that was really good. 23 of 43, a QBR of 46.9. One of the dumbest plays of the weekend on a crucial 4th down, had a wide open running lane. Instead of taking the 7 yards and taking the 1st down, he zips one in the dirt. And I get it. He's a first-time starter. Dude, he's been there 4 years. Like, at some point, you cannot be making those mistakes as a 4-year junior. Made a lot of poor decisions throughout this game. And I still see people backing him up. If you haven't noticed something is going to be good through 4 years, it's not really likely something's going to be all of a sudden good 4 years, 4 years after the fact. Like, backup quarterbacks in the NFL that get drafted 3 or 4 years ago and hang around on the practice squad or hang around as a second string looking for an opportunity, they usually get cut or don't make it because they're just not good enough. If you haven't seen enough, then why play him long term? And I get it. Jalen Milroe was in front of him, but Jalen Milroe wasn't some all-star quarterback last year. He made a lot of mistakes. And at times they turned him into more of a running quarterback at the end of the season because they didn't really trust him down the field. So Ty Simpson has a lot of work to do, and I think Keelan Russell's the better option here. Keelan Russell gives Alabama a playmaker. Ty Simpson had a couple of nice scrambles, but that's not a guy that I'm willing to go to battle for a national championship. I'm not going into a national championship game and saying, oh, we're up against like a Garrett Nussmeier. Thank gosh, we've got Ty Simpson. Who the hell's saying that? No one. I was out on Ty Simpson before this game started. I was out on Ty Simpson this offseason. Keelan Russell's the best quarterback in that room, and Ty Simpson's not moving the needle. Even if you want to compare him to Mac Jones, he cannot be Mac Jones on this team. It's a totally different group. It's a transfer portal era where every team is different year in and year out. I don't see it with Ty Simpson, and he lost me this weekend again. I will give credit to Florida State. I know I harped on Alabama a good bit there, but I will give credit to Florida State. Thomas Castellanos was not Tommy Castellanos. And if you get that reference, he was Tommy Castellanos at Boston College. Had a rough ending there. Ends up coming to Florida State. Has revived his career. He was really strong. 152 in the air, 78 on the ground. Really made life difficult for this Alabama defense, kept them guessing throughout. And I thought it was a really, really impressive performance from him. I'm not willing to put Florida State as a national title contender yet or a college football playoff contender yet, but I do think they're in the mix of a top 25 level team if they look like that up against a roster that I believe is top 10 in the country. So I will give Florida State respect on my Patterson poll this week heading into week 2. But I do think the jury is still out on if that offense is able to have sustained success over the course of the season. How much of that was just Gus Malzahn dialing up a really, really impressive performance and not having a whole lot of tape for Alabama to watch heading into it. So I do wonder about that. Looking at Alabama's remaining schedule, you got Wisconsin in week 3. I think that's a win. At Georgia, week 5 off a bye. I had a person tell me today Alabama's going to go to Georgia and beat them. That's the stupidest take I've heard this week. Almost stupider than Mac Jones is the same thing as Ty Simpson. So Georgia will beat Alabama at home. It's impossible to beat Georgia on the road. I don't see how Alabama's going to go on the road and do that. Tennessee week 8, I think, is a win. Tennessee just can't beat the Tide in Tuscaloosa. I don't think that changes this year. South Carolina week 9 looks a little bit more dicey than it did maybe a couple of weeks ago. LSU week 11 off a bye looks a lot more difficult than it did a couple of weeks ago. Then Oklahoma week 12 at Auburn week 14. This is a schedule that sets up for a possible world of hurt if they're not able to turn things around here quickly. And after what we saw this weekend, things have got to change big time. So if Alabama wants to find success, they've got to get rid of the turnovers. They've got to get rid of the boneheaded plays. They've got to get rid of the just walking into a building and thinking you're better than everyone mentality. That's not going to work in this transfer portal era where teams are totally different year in and year out, continue to get better, and having the type of boneheaded mistakes just is so shocking to see an Alabama team do week in and week out. I'm interested to see how Alabama fans take the next couple of weeks because Kalen DeBoer might not have a parking spot here soon. All right, last game recap before we get into kind of some smaller individual takes. We've got Notre Dame and Miami. And boy, do I have a strong opinion about what the Fighting Irish did on Sunday night. By the way, I thoroughly enjoyed this weekend. I loved having some Sunday night football. That's college football. Now, it makes my schedule a little bit tougher because we also had a game tonight as TCU just mollywopped UNC. Yeah, there, I got rid of that one. It's already over. That was the quickest fourth quarter ever. They wanted to get him out of there, 48-14. The Horned Frogs get it done. Really impressed with Josh Hoover tonight, by the way. But I did enjoy the schedule. We had some nonstop college football. My Saturday was 10 a.m. to 2 a.m., just college football. It was awesome. Sunday, though, Notre Dame, Miami, the Hurricanes have caused a storm. And this is another really, really impressive performance from a team that I had a couple of questions about. Heading into this one, Notre Dame's debuting a new quarterback, CJ Carr. But I thought the return of the running back tandem of Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love would be really beneficial and cause a lot of trouble for opposing teams. Also, plenty of defensive pieces back. Christian Gray, Adon Schuler. This is a group that has a lot of insurance with what their defense was. But I was interested to see what does this Notre Dame defense look like without Al Golden, and Chris Ash takes over at defensive coordinator. For Miami, it's Carson Beck and Shannon Dawson's air raid offense. Well, their defense, that was one of the worst in the ACC last year, be better under Corey Heatherman, who was a defense coordinator last year for Minnesota and manned a top 10 defense. So those were the questions coming in. And similar to the LSU Clemson game, my big takeaway from this one, Miami has a defense. And Corey Heatherman was a guy I talked about a good bit on the preseason top 25 episode. And he did a really good job with the Gophers with that 4-2-5 defense that was top 10 in the country. They were number 8 overall in total team defense. And Miami last year was good, but their defense continued to push them back and put them in tough positions. And I thought the defense was really, really strong Saturday or Sunday night. Notre Dame with Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love only rushed for 94 yards. Miami also forces 2 turnovers. One of the turnovers was one of the craziest turnovers or craziest plays possibly of the year. The tipped interception off of someone's foot. That was crazy. But the pressure that they were able to put on CJ Carr was really, really good. The one-on-one coverage was really, really strong as well. And I look at guys, particularly up front, like Raul Aguirre Jr. and Ruben Bain. Ruben Bain was so good. And Akeem Mesidor. They combined for 17 tackles, 2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss combined. That's winning football. And Ruben Bain had his footprint all over this one early and often, was constantly in the backfield, putting a ton of pressure, was great in stopping the run. And Miami had a ton of questions this offseason. They have got a lot of new players too, but they were so good offensively last year, but the defense was just like pull your hair out bad. Just like, how do you allow Cal to run up the scoreboard and Virginia Tech with Kyron Droves? We saw how he looked this weekend. Like, how do you allow teams like that to run it up last year? But you bring in Heatherman, and having a player like Reuben Bain, who I think is going to be a first-round pick, was huge. And those guys stepped up and made big plays. It was even more critical to do that up against a defense, or excuse me, an offense with a brand new quarterback in CJ Carr. And Miami put pressure on them and made sure that, that Notre Dame had a tough time getting into their rhythm. And that game plan I was not a fan of. But I think if Miami is able to keep this up and is able to get this constant pressure, they are a legitimate ACC title contender. They could beat Clemson, because we saw what LSU did defensively, a ton of front pressure from the linebackers and defensive front. They were able to win the one-on-one matchups and coverage. That's going to set up for a tough matchup for Clemson if they're not able to establish the run. And if Notre Dame wasn't able to do that with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, I have a hard time seeing how Adam Randall is going to do that. So Miami, hats off to their defense. My top two most improved units in college football in week one, LSU's defense, Miami's defense. They have been huge question marks over the last couple of seasons. They stepped up in big moments. They put a ton of pressure on opposing quarterbacks. They forced tight windows. They forced, split decisions. Those two units, the most improved defenses that I saw this weekend, and they have elevated the ceiling of both of those teams. I want to give a shout out to Miami and LSU for some really good defense. We'll switch to Notre Dame, though, because one of the most mind-boggling things watching this game was Notre Dame's game plan. I'm sitting there watching. You've got Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love. What the hell are you doing? I get it. You've got a new quarterback in CJ Carr. You want to get him acclimated. But, dude, run the ball. Run the ball, please. 6 out of the first 7 plays of this game was a pass. How does Jeremiah Love not get more touches? The best running back in the country gets 4 carries heading into the midway point of the third quarter. How is that possible? How? CJ Carr gets more carries than Jeremiah Love. CJ Carr gets 11 carries for 33 yards. Jeremiah Love goes 10 carries for 33 yards. Jadarian Price goes 6 carries for 45. Last year, Notre Dame had a running quarterback in Riley Leonard, and it worked. You could do this. But CJ Carr is not a running quarterback. CJ Carr is a playmaker in the passing game, and that was supposed to be a big upgrade for this team. CJ Carr should not be getting more running touches than Jeremiah Love. That was huge malpractice. I get it. Trying to get CJ Carr involved early was, I guess, smart heading into it, but it's really dumb when you've got one of the best running backs in the country in your backfield and one of the best running back tandems in the country in your backfield. That was a big mistake. And I thought it allowed Miami to set the tone on the defensive line because they were able to get so much pressure on those RPOs and long balls down the field to where the offensive line got tired out early, and the pass blocking then allowed for Miami to get a lot of wear and tear on that Notre Dame offensive line, which then, they were not as successful in the run game after that. So I thought it was a very questionable game plan. I think that Marcus Freeman's a really, really good coach. I did not like his philosophy in this one, and I thought that was a big mistake in a matchup like this where Notre Dame plays a schedule where you've got to make the most of these top 10 games, these top 25 matchups. They're not a ton of them on their schedule. They've got to make the most of it, and they did not do that on Sunday. I was a big no on the game plan, and hopefully Notre Dame realizes that. Don't go away from your identity. Don't do what has worked in years past and worked all of last year and abandon it for a guy that has yet to take a snap in college football as a starter. Thought that was a bad plan. I get it. You want to make him, feel comfortable and get him going early, but not when you have Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. Carson Beck, I was really impressed with him too. Carson Beck's connection with his new receivers, I thought, was one of the big takeaways from this Miami game as well. where Beck has that injury in the SEC championship game, has a very interesting offseason where he's still rehabbing and trying to get back onto the field. Didn't have a ton of time to work that connection with his new receivers. There was a lot of talk on the broadcast about how he's, formed a connection mutual wise and personality wise, but hasn't really been able to form that connection in practice and in reps. But that practice didn't seem to be an issue Sunday night as Carson Beck looked dialed. 20 of 31, 205 yards, 2 touchdowns. They've got a big-time playmaker in Malachi Toney, who had 6 receptions for 81 yards and a touchdown. C.J. Daniels with the catch of the year so far, rivaling Vernell Brown of Florida. Daniels goes 5 receptions, 46 yards, 1 touchdown, a guy that was really good at Liberty. Didn't really get the opportunity to flourish last year at LSU. Was strong for the Hurricanes Sunday night. And then Keelan Marion, 3 receptions for 29 yards. The connection and the chemistry that Carson Beck had with these receivers was really, really impressive. And I think was a big reason why Miami was able to walk out of this one with a win. Keep in mind, Miami was up, 21-7 midway through the third quarter of this one. And that was because Carson Beck was dialed in and, was really, really comfortable. I thought Carson Beck was the top quarterback in college football heading into last season. Again, heading into last season, I still had him as a top 10 guy this year because I do believe in Shannon Dawson's offense. I think they were able to establish the run well enough to where it worked, to where you had that nice balance. I was worried if Damian Martinez, now him being gone, if Miami would be able to establish that, but they did. And the pass game worked because of Carson Beck, the patience, the fluidity down the field, and also identifying those go-to players. Malachi Toney, a huge hit. And that was a guy that wasn't on my radar heading into this matchup. I was looking at guys like Marion and Daniels, and Toney was really, really good. That's a guy that's going to be making plays in the future for the Hurricanes. Looking at the remaining schedule for Miami, you've got Florida in week 4 at home. That now sets up to be a really, really fun matchup. At Florida State, week 6 off a bye is a very interesting matchup now, with Florida State getting the win over Bama. And then at SMU, week 10, I put that on there because SMU is apparently striping that game out. It's going to be a big deal. They had to announce it like months in advance because usually no one goes to SMU games. But I feel like at that point in the season, SMU will be a 2 or 3 loss team. Miami goes in there and gets a win. For Notre Dame, you've got to take advantage of the opportunities ahead of you, beginning with Texas A&M in week 3. Notre Dame is off this upcoming week, and they'll play the Aggies at home. They've got to get a win there. At Arkansas, week 5, one of the most ridiculous matchups of the season. Why the hell is Notre Dame going to Arkansas? I don't know, but that should be a winnable game. Boise State, week 6, a winnable game, especially after what we saw them look like against South Florida. And then USC in week 8, I threw that on there because maybe USC is good. But again, we haven't seen much of Lincoln Riley and success in the same sentence over the last couple of seasons. But Notre Dame's not out of it. They need to take advantage of the opportunities ahead of them. They need to run the damn ball and give the ball to Jeremiah Love, the best running back in the country next to Nick Singleton. Miami made a lot of progress this weekend on my board, and I thought was really, really impressive. All right, a couple of other notable takeaways, and sorry if you're watching on YouTube, I had to grab a charger for my computer, so that's why it kind of cut out there for a second. Other notable takeaways, I want to talk Tennessee, Syracuse. Joey Aguilar, really, really impressive in his debut. Josh Heupel debuted a couple of new formations, some pre-snap motion, some new looks. That was a talking point this offseason. Will Josh Heupel get back to that 2022 offense? And I don't think that's achievable without having a guy like Jalen Hyatt and a Hendon Hooker. But what I do think is achievable is revitalizing this offense. And I think that's what Heupel did, to where you saw basically 0 RPOs that are stretched out miles and miles away, and more, 2 running back looks, more pre-snap motion, more 12 personnel. I thought Tennessee's offense looked a lot more refined and a lot more modernized in terms of the Josh Heupel offense. And Joey Aguilar goes 16 of 28, 247 yards, 3 touchdowns. He got comfortable early because Heupel gave him a lot of easy throws. Aguilar missed on a couple of them, but I thought he was in rhythm as the game went on. And one of the most beautiful plays of the game was perfectly set up by Heupel and Aguilar. They're in that two running back set, and they run two run plays off of it, back-to-back plays, sets up for a huge pass play, RPO. Aguilar reads the safety coming down, and he hits Braylon Staley for a 73-yard touchdown. The hit rate on those deep passes, I thought, was much improved from what Tennessee had under Nico Iamaleava and Joe Milton. And that is more 2022-esque, hitting on those deep shots down the field. So I love that from Aguilar, and I thought Tennessee looked really good offensively. That was a big question for me. What do those receivers look like? But Braylon Staley, Mike Matthews, Chris Brazell, they were all strong. The running back room is, I think, the strongest of the Josh Heupel era. They did a really good job with Deshaun Bishop giving you some really good ball carrier vision. Peyton Lewis being a guy that can put his head down and go right through you. Star Thomas, the Duke transfer out of the backfield, that is kind of this utility knife player, a guy that can, be used as a runner, but also as a pass catcher out of the backfield. And the offensive line was really, really good too. I thought Tennessee had one of the more impressive weekends offensively out of any team in the country, given everything they experienced this offseason. So hats off to them. They looked really, really good. And Joey Aguilar was the better quarterback in the quarterback trade this weekend, as Nico Iamaleava, I am a 0-1, was a big time hit on Instagram. I appreciate if you follow at ThePatteFacts. Nico goes 11 of 22 for 136 yards, a touchdown, an interception. I don't want to spend much time on UCLA, but that experience was everything I expected when Nico decided to go there. UCLA was one of the worst offensive teams in the country, bad offensive line, bad weapons. Nico might have gotten paid and might say that he went there to go see his family, but there was nothing about that game outside of what Utah did that screamed college football environment. The Rose Bowl is really fun when UCLA is not playing in it. The stadium was empty. Nico overthrew a bunch of players, a bunch of throws, a bunch of receivers, threw a bad interception, just seemed to kind of have the same type of attitude he did last year. And hearing a lot of the interviews from after these Tennessee games when the players are talking about, kind of the difference between last year and this year, and they'll mention the leadership, that tells me the type of leader that Nico Iamaleava was. And that's not a guy that I want to face adversity with. So it's going to be interesting to see what UCLA looks like against UNLV. But Iamaleava, I think, is tanking his draft stock, toiling around at UCLA, who's going to be a borderline 500 team. UNLV, a team that looked embarrassingly bad against Idaho State, is only plus 2.5 against this team. So I don't think UCLA is very good. That was evident this weekend. Nico Iamaleava continues to kind of be made a fool, or show he made a fool of himself this offseason making the decision. But Joey Aguilar is stronger. Maybe Tennessee got the better quarterback of the deal. Speaking of good quarterback play, and I wasn't talking about Nico, in the same game as Nico, however, Devin Dampier, the New Mexico transfer, was really, really good for the Utah Utes. I put them in my top 25 this week. 21 of 25, 293 total yards, 3 total touchdowns, got it done on the ground as well. Devin Dampier, a very, very underrated candidate for a Heisman. I'd throw a little bit of money on him. I know Utah is not going to be like the top team in the country, but they've got a schedule that could set up to where they could have some success. And Dampier was really, really strong, just dialed in, was accurate on all of his throws, made really good reads and progressions, knew when to scramble out of the pocket. I thought he was really, really good. And a couple of my listeners talked to me about it this summer. The John and Will Hornsby were really big fans of Dampier. And I said, I like him too. I didn't really realize it was going to be this good, this quick. Dampier was really, really impressive. And Utah, I think, has a much higher ceiling than I expected. And that was on showcase this weekend. Dampier is going to be good for this Utah team. Final other notable take, Jackson Arnold and Auburn get a signature win, but I'd pump the brakes a little bit on Auburn being back. Jackson Arnold goes 11 for 17, 108 yards, which is good. 16 carries, 137 yards, 2 touchdowns. I thought he looked the part of a 5-star quarterback, but what I'm worried about is the amount of success that he had during the game with the run. I thought it was more so bad defense and bad containment from Baylor. Jackson Arnold in the SEC is probably not getting 16 carries for 137 yards. That's what worries me for Auburn because, yes, it is a big win over a Baylor team that I believe was a top 25 team heading into the season, had a top 10 quarterback in Sawyer Robertson. Robertson, had a lot of yards, but was not as impressive as I had hoped and had a couple of, was susceptible to a couple of really key drops. But I'm interested to see what Auburn looks like in that first SEC game because, yes, this is a big win. This was a lot of pressure heading into this one for Hugh Freeze, but the method of how they won was a little bit fluky. That kick return touchdown and Jackson Arnold runs like a chicken with his head cut off for 137 yards. That's not happening against like an LSU. That's not happening against, an Oklahoma. I don't see them having that much success in the run game in SEC in terms of quarterback run play. So that's the only concern I have from that Baylor win, or excuse me, Auburn win. It's a big win. They needed it. They need some momentum, but I'd pump the brakes on saying that Auburn's going to be like really, really good now that they got that win. Let's see what they look like against an SEC team. All right. And that is all of my notes from week 1 of college football. Man, this was fun. I really think this was one of my stronger episodes. Hopefully you agree. And you follow at ThePatteFacts on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Reminder, this one is going to be on YouTube as well. So if you're listening and you want to watch, go watch on YouTube. Really good stuff. And at TPFacts on Sports on TikTok. We've made a ton of progress, folks, over the last couple of weeks in terms of our reach. I really, really appreciate it. We're about to eclipse 9 million views on Instagram alone in the last 30 days. That's some big time growth. We've gotten a couple of big time follows as well. Shout out to former Tennessee volunteer running back Dylan Sampson for hitting me with a follow. Loved watching him play last year. But again, guys, we're making growth and we're trying to grow this thing. So I appreciate all the support. We'll be back later for more college football conversation, more college football takeaways. Week 2, not as loaded as week 1, but we'll still have a ton to break down. And also going to be putting out some clips from this episode on the social media channels. So make sure you're following. And also YouTube, you see the new merch, college football spelled the right way, coming out here pretty soon. So you get first dibs, first looks at it. So appreciate you listening along with me. I'm William Pattison, signing out.